This is the Analogue Pocket, and it's the closest thing there is to a portable MiSTer FPGA. I'm Matt D'Amico, and welcome to episode 95 of Retro Bits. Released in December of 2021, the Pocket is a retro-inspired handheld game console manufactured by Analogue Inc. The device uses a field programmable gate array, or FPGA, to replicate the original game systems down to the transistor level. As delivered, it can play games from the Nintendo Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance. With adapters, it can also accept cartridges from the Sega Game Gear, PC Engine, Neo Geo Pocket Color, and Atari Lynx. The company has been developing retro game consoles since 2011. That includes a number of FPGA-based systems ranging from the NES to the Sega Genesis. But the Pocket is their first foray into portable gaming. Of course, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of other retro handhelds on the market today. So how does the Pocket stand out in this sea of low-cost devices that commonly feature ARM processors running Linux or Android with RetroArch software emulation? First and foremost is that the Pocket implements not one, but two separate FPGAs for hardware-based emulation or implementation if you prefer. It also sports a vastly superior display compared to its cheaper competition, featuring a resolution of 1600 by 1440. Compare that to the popular mi.low Mini Plus or Anbernic RG35XX, both of which use 640 by 480 screens. We'll get to the technical specs later, but first, what difference does the FPGA make over traditional software emulation? I've previously discussed this in the MiSTer FPGA episode, but here's a quick summary. Software emulation attempts to replicate the behavior of original hardware, but can suffer from input, processing, and output latency depending on how well it was coded and the capabilities of the system it's running on. FPGA-based hardware implementation has the potential to be cycle accurate, replicating the original chips down to the transistor level, all working together in parallel. That's not always the case, however, as it's entirely possible for an FPGA to be used to replicate input, output, and timing, but not the actual circuitry of the original device. All right, so what we've got here is the Analogue Pocket in black, and you can see from the case, it's got the Analogue Pocket logo embossed there, and this is a nice hard plastic case. It's not cardboard. In terms of the size of the packaging, it's about the same as an original Sega Game Gear, maybe a little bit shorter and a little bit taller. But let's get this thing opened up and let's see what's inside. There we go. Looks like the device takes up pretty much the entire box. And inside we've got some literature and a USB-C charging cable. And inside this little pouch, we've got an analog sticker. We've got some basic directions on quick start guide and some of the buttons. And a little sticker that says FPGA on it. All right, that's it for this little pocket. Let's take a closer look at the Analogue Pocket itself. The Pocket itself is quite handsome and was clearly inspired by the original Game Boy DMG. It's available in a variety of colors, including a number of limited edition translucent models, but here I've opted for the incredibly difficult to film black on black. On the front of the device, the 3.5-inch backlit LTPS LCD screen dominates. The native resolution of 1600 by 1440 allows for a perfect 10x integer scale of the original Game Boy and Game Boy Color screens. That works out to a density of an incredible 615 pixels per inch, much higher than the latest iPhone 15 or Samsung Galaxy. By comparison, the mighty Steam Deck has only 215 ppi. Refresh rates from 30 to 62 Hz are supported, and a variety of video modes have been implemented to replicate the look and feel of the original hardware. We'll have to compare the screens of those classic Game Boys to the Pocket, but before that, let's see how this modern reimagining stacks up to the systems that inspired it. Size-wise, the Pocket is very similar to the DMG overall, but the difference in screen size offers a stark contrast. Game Boy shrunk a little over successive generations, but us older folk will appreciate the comfort afforded by the larger footprint here. Around the back, we find the cartridge slot that is directly compatible with the first 3 generations of Game Boy consoles. At the time this video was published, an adapter for Sega Game Gear cartridges is available for separate purchase, while PC Engine / TurboGrafx-16, Neo Geo Pocket Color, and Atari Lynx adapters are available only for pre-order. Looking at the controls now, the Pocket has a standard 8-way D-pad, along with 4 assignable buttons. Shoulder buttons can be found behind the screen and are reasonably comfortable to use with adult-sized hands. At the bottom, Start and Select buttons are in the expected arrangement, along with an analog logo button in the middle that calls up the OS menu at any time. On the side, there are volume and brightness controls, as well as the power/sleep button. In spite of the company's name, the Pocket wasn't graced with an analog stick, so we may find ourselves doing the D-pad tap dance when playing some of the arcade cores. In terms of input and output, we've got a USB-C port for charging and file transfer. A link interface allows for up to 4-way multiplayer with both real Game Boys and other Pockets. A status LED displays amber when charging, green when fully charged, and white when the system is powered on. The IR transceiver lets dozens of supported Game Boy Color titles make use of wireless communication, and there's a 3.5mm stereo jack for your headphones. A micro SD card is used for save states, screenshots, and openFPGA cores. The built-in stereo speakers are a little tinny, but surprisingly loud. The Pocket itself has a reasonable heft to it, neither cheap-feeling nor uncomfortably heavy. The case is a bit plasticky, but overall the design is nice enough. While the controls are well placed, one common complaint is that the D-pad is a bit mushy compared to some other handhelds. In practice, I found it to be responsive enough that it never gave me any trouble. The first thing you'll want to do is update the device's firmware. My Pocket was delivered in the autumn of 2023, but still had software from 2022, which didn't even have support for the openFPGA cores. I grabbed the latest file from the Analogue website and copied it to a freshly formatted microSD card. Either FAT32 or exFAT will work. Once you insert the card and power on the Pocket, it'll automatically detect the new firmware and update if necessary. As far as other initial steps, well, it wouldn't hurt to give a read through the setup guide on the website. There are a number of useful button combos you want to learn for save states, screenshots, and things like that. Or you can just keep watching this video, that'd work too. Other than that though, you really can just start using the Pocket right out of the box. Alright, let's try this thing out. For that, we need Game Boy cartridges. Unfortunately, I don't currently have any original, color, or advanced games, so I'm in a bit of a pickle here. Let me hop in the car and take a trip down to Pinay Collectibles in Woodbridge, Virginia, where I suspect my friend Jason can help me out. Games now in hand. Thanks, Jason. The way to get started is as simple as it ever was. Of course, you can also copy ROMs to the SD card and load up an openFPGA core, but we'll dive into that a bit later. Now a disclaimer. I found it to be quite difficult to film the screen of the Pocket due to its size and how glossy the surface is. I had to shoot from an angle so as not to get a reflection of the camera in every shot. I record at 1080p 30, but the Pocket's display is 1440p 60, so what you see here isn't representative of the actual experience. You'll have to take my word for it that it looks much better in person than it does in this video. Sorry about that. Alright, enough excuses. Let's look at some of the controls. Pressing the analog button in the middle will call up the main OS menu. From here, you can exit the game you're playing, access save states, video and audio settings, and other configuration options. One nice feature to note is that cartridges are hot swappable. Just quit your game and insert a new one. No need to power the device off and on like in the old days. Pressing both volume up and down together will mute the audio. Holding the analog button while pressing volume up or down will adjust the screen's brightness. This can also be done from the settings menu. Here's an original Game Boy so we can see how it compares to the modern console. We'll use the Pocket's simulated DMG display mode first, then look at the other options. Pressing the analog button and left or right switches between the 5 available video modes. Cartridges from all regions are supported. Further, the Pocket works with multi-carts, EverDrives, save games, the Game Boy camera, tilt and gyro sensors, rumble packs, and more. The Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Gear all had an original resolution of 160 by 144 using square pixels. With an exact 10x integer scale, the Pocket is able to deliver pixel-perfect accuracy, as well as use its high-density display to faithfully replicate the look and feel of the original screens. The Game Boy Advance had an original resolution of 240 by 160. The Pocket scales this to 1600 by 1067 to fill the screen as much as possible while maintaining the original aspect ratio. I mean, what more can I say? Before we move on to openFPGA, let's talk save states. These can be created by pressing the analog button and up at any time. You can take a screenshot by pressing both analog and start. Save states are currently a beta feature and didn't work with every game I tried. Pressing analog and down should load the most recent save, but didn't for me. That said, both save states and screenshots are accessible through the menu, and hopefully the feature will be improved upon in future updates. If you want to connect the Pocket to your PC in order to browse the SD card directly, go into the Developer menu and enable the USB option shown here. This will come in handy later when we look at Pocket Sync and openFPGA cores. And while I'm in here, under the Analog OS settings in Startup Action, you can choose what happens when you power on the device. If you plan to use openFPGA more than cartridges, this will come in handy. Speaking of USB, I'm curious to see what happens when a controller is connected to the Pocket. Will it work so we can use it with cores that normally require an analog input? Well, it looks like the answer is no. The controller simply won't pair up with the Pocket at all. There is a separate analog dock that lets you use an external display and wired or wireless gamepads, but we'll have to look at that another day. Now we're finally ready to talk about the feature that sets the Pocket far apart from its competition, and where we can start to draw comparisons to the MiSTer. That, of course, is openFPGA, an SDK that allows third-party developers to bring additional computer and game system cores to the console using the second, more powerful FPGA already inside the device. By opening up access to this complete hardware ecosystem and providing comprehensive documentation, the company has bestowed the Pocket with limitless possibilities and opened the door to new and existing video game preservation efforts. In terms of available cores, there are already quite a few. Starting with arcades, a handful of early classics are represented, from Pong and Asteroids to later titles like Silkworm and Green Beret. Already a prolific developer on the MiSTer, Hotego has been simultaneously porting his latest cores to the Pocket. He's already made dozens of games available, including those running on some pretty advanced arcade hardware, such as Capcom's CPS-1 and Sega's System 16. Even multi-CPU superscalar games like Outrun are here and working great on the Pocket. Computer cores are limited due to lack of input options, but there is a working Amiga core as well as Space War on the PDP-1, considered to be one of the earliest and most influential computer games. I've heard rumor of a Commodore 64 core in the works as well. Next, we have classic consoles, and that's where openFPGA really starts to flex its library. Pretty much everything from the Fairchild Channel F all the way to the Neo Geo can be found here, along with some oddballs like the VTech Creative Vision. Finally, there are a handful of handhelds available too. From the Tamagotchi and Megaduck to the WonderSwan Color, portable gaming is the Pocket's bread and butter. I wonder what cores the community will come out with next. To get going with all this gaming goodness, you could visit each project's GitHub one at a time, or you could use RetroDriven's Pocket Updater. If the name sounds familiar, that's because the same developer created a popular updater for the MiSTer before moving on to this project. The tool will set up your SD card with all of the openFPGA cores and necessary BIOS files. You can choose which systems you want to have installed, customize how they're organized on your SD card, and download art packs for the different systems. To install everything, select the drive letter of your SD card. I don't want automatic firmware updates, so I'll disable that option, but leave all the other default settings alone. When you click Update, it will build out the necessary directory structure, download the latest version of each core, and drop the BIOS files in the right places. If you're a Patreon supporter of Hotego, you can put your jtbeta.zip in the root of your SD card, and the tool will extract it to the correct location and download the beta cores for you as well. With that done, I think it's finally time we took a look at how openFPGA elevates the Pocket experience. Heck yeah! And it's only going to get better from here. Speaking of, here's one I intentionally left out, the Amiga core. This one features hard drive support, mouse emulation, and a virtual keyboard, so you can actually use the machine to a reasonable extent. There's a custom version of Amiga Vision available that's specifically designed for the Pocket. This project packages up a curated list of games and demos arranged by title, year, and genre, and presents it all in an easy-to-use interface. The controls are already mapped for the Pocket, taking all the guesswork out of building disk images and configuring software. A few clicks, and you'll be up and enjoying all the best that the Amiga has to offer well on the go. A useful tool for managing your console is PocketSync by Neil Morrison 44. While it's not an all-in-one updater, it does let you install and manage individual openFPGA cores and game files. You can also view information about each of the cores, review button mappings, and update various controller settings. You'll also find all of your screenshots and save states here for review. You can view the screenshots directly, delete the ones you no longer want, or upscale and export them to your PC. The same is true for save states, although it appears the program backs them up automatically once you select a target folder on your PC. You can also update image and data packs associated with the openFPGA cores, download the latest Pocket firmware, as well as a variety of other features. PocketSync is available for Windows, Mac, and Linux, and I've dropped a link to the project in the description, along with all the other tools I mentioned earlier. We've seen what the Pocket offers in terms of gaming on the go, but what if you're at home and don't already have a MiSTer FPGA? In that case, the Analogue dock might be the answer. It lets you connect the Pocket to an HDMI display and use wired or wireless controllers, as well as mice and keyboards with the computer cores such as the Amiga. Another way to use the Pocket is as a portable music maker. Nanoloop is a well-known sequencer and synthesizer for the Game Boy and comes preloaded on the Pocket. With it, you can create repeating sequences or entire songs, and even integrate it with other musical instruments for live performances. If you want to sync Nanoloop to the clock of an external MIDI device, digital audio workstation, or even another Pocket, there are cables available for that too. And finally, GB Studio allows you to create your own retro games for the Pocket without any programming knowledge by using a drag-and-drop interface on your PC. Okay, I think we have a pretty good idea of the features and capabilities of the Pocket. So the big question now is, how does it compare to the MiSTer FPGA? Well, let's take a look. First of all, this isn't an apples-to-apples comparison. The MiSTer was designed for use with a CRT or modern display, while the Pocket is a handheld with a built-in screen that accepts real cartridges and runs on a battery. That being said, let's have a look at the technical specs anyway. For science. The FPGA is the heart of both systems, so we'll start there. The MiSTer has a Cyclone 5 SE with 110,000 logic elements. The Pocket has two FPGAs, a smaller Cyclone 10 with 15,000 LEs that runs the Analogue OS and handles video processing, and a more powerful Cyclone 5 with 49,000 LEs that runs the openFPGA cores. The MiSTer can be configured with 1 or 2 SDRAM modules for a maximum of 256 megabytes in a dual-ported configuration for cores requiring high memory bandwidth. The underlying ARM CPU running Linux also has RAM that can be used by cores that do not require high memory performance. The Pocket has 3 different types of memory available for openFPGA developers to use depending on their needs, including 32 megabytes of 16-bit cellular PS RAM that offers very low latency and asynchronous access, 64 megabytes of standard PC133 SDRAM, and 256 kilobytes of standard SRAM. Okay, so what are the most advanced cores that have been implemented on these hardware footprints? The MiSTer is maxed out when running a 486 PC, Sony PlayStation, Sega Saturn, or Nintendo 64. Currently, the most advanced cores for the Pocket are the Capcom Play System 1, Sega's Outrun, Neo Geo, and Amiga. With only half the logic elements of the MiSTer, it's safe to say that the 5th gen consoles will never make it over to the Pocket. The MiSTer supports pretty much any HID device you can plug into it, including wired and wireless gamepads, mice, keyboard, and force feedback wheels. Also supported are Bluetooth and Wi-Fi dongles, MIDI interfaces, external hard drives, and more. The Pocket has a more limited set of compatible input devices and requires the separate dock to make use of them. Analog video and the ability to connect to a CRT is a big selling point for the MiSTer. Of course, the Pocket has its own screen, but it can also generate analog video output with the addition of both the dock and digital to analog converter add-on. Because the cores don't generate the video signals natively, using this setup will likely introduce some additional latency. General purpose I/O includes things such as serial connectivity, MIDI, and the ability to connect controllers and disk drives from original vintage systems. The MiSTer is much more of an open playground for hardware and software developers to see what kind of capabilities they can graft on, whereas the Pocket really wasn't designed to be hooked up to a dozen different wired devices. On the low end, the MiSTer's DE10 Nano will run you $225 by itself. For a fully optioned system, with a USB hub, I/O board, SDRAM, and an aluminum case, you're looking at about double that. If you want add-ons like an MT32 Pi or snack adapter, add in a little more. In contrast, the Pocket is complete at $220 all in, unless you opt for one of the more expensive limited edition colors. Adding a dock and all the available cartridge adapters brings that up to $450. Like the MiSTer, there are other add-ons to consider, such as link and MIDI cables, hard cases, and screen protectors that I didn't factor into the total. Bottom line, both systems are awesome in their own right. They share a number of similarities, but target different segments of the market. The MiSTer is a tinkerer's dream come true, whereas the Pocket is a polished and complete system right out of the box. Both are under active community development, and Analogue continues to support the base product with updates and new features. So to recap, why might you want the Analogue Pocket, and what sets it apart from the myriad of other retro handhelds out there? First and foremost, the Pocket is for those of you who have a library of existing game carts and want to enjoy an improved experience with a vastly superior screen and longer battery life without spending hundreds to upgrade your original vintage devices. Next, the Pocket is for those of you who appreciate the low latency and potential for cycle-accurate gameplay offered by openFPGA hardware emulation or implementation. Perhaps you just enjoy the open nature of the project and seeing what the amazingly talented developer community will come out with next as new arcade, console, and computer cores are released and refined. Or maybe you just like to fiddle. Any way you slice it, it's clear that there was an audience for a device like the Pocket, and Analogue knew it. They clearly have a passion for retro gaming, and it shows in the details. Of course, the Pocket isn't for everyone, and FPGA isn't a panacea. Not all cores are created equally, and they're not automatically guaranteed to be better than software emulators. Instead of spending hundreds of dollars on a new device, you could mod your existing handheld like the PSP, Vita, 3DS, or even run software emulation on a Steam Deck. Less expensive handhelds that use RetroArch or the like will have a much larger library of supported consoles and games, including more advanced systems that will never be seen on the Pocket.
Wow! Oh no! Finish!
So there we have it. The Analogue Pocket occupies a unique spot among retro handhelds. And while it's certainly not for everyone, if you've made it this far, you probably have a pretty good idea if it's for you. I hope you enjoyed this bit. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Retro Bits.